Welcome back to more Warhammer lore. In today's video we will be delving for the final time into the pantheon of the Dark Gods, covering the Prince of Pleasure, the Lord of Excess, the Serpent, Slaanesh. I will be taking all of the information for this video from the latest army books, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, specifically the 2nd edition, and most importantly the Warhammer Fantasy novels put out by the Black Library. So join me as we brave the trials of Slaanesh and succumb to our greatest desires before the Prince of Pleasure. Now, before we venture into any forbidden gardens, a brief disclaimer. In our previous entries into the Dark Gods, we have discussed how and why chaos exists and where its realms lay. For a more detailed account of this principle, I would advise you to watch the overall chaos video, and the Khorne video specifically, because I will be assuming you are familiar with these topics going further. For this video, we'll only be covering Slaanesh, what he / it is, where it makes its home, what it desires for the mortal realm, and whom exactly the Dark Prince tempts under his sway, and of course, his possible inclusion in Total War Warhammer, hence the title. And I do believe I will be using the term he because I will often forget to say she or it. So do beg my pardon on that account. The Prince of Pleasure, the Dark Prince, the Lord of Excess, the Serpent, these are just some of the titles for the Dark God Slaanesh. He is the embodiment of discontent, excess, and pleasure above all. He yearns for decadence and the pursuit of the extreme, be those emotions or experiences. This can range from carnal delight to acts of gluttony, hedonism, and megalomania. But he is also a god of art, beauty, perfection, and love. However, this is not the simple act of a husband and wife embracing one another, or a baron hosting a banquet. These are much more devious acts that come from the dark places of one's desires. These are the orgies of flesh and writhing masses of ecstasy. These are the balls where blood flows like wine and flesh, the main course. These are the lords that rest their laurels on the backs of their people while selecting their daughters as concubines for the night. These extreme acts are what feed the Prince of Pleasure, and he eats well. Those few that have seen Slaanesh and have their minds still relatively intact have described him as both male and female, perhaps more male and very young, resembling a lithe human teenager that exudes carnality and promises bliss. The Lord of Excess can be found beneath a massive pavilion, for in his realm there are no fortresses, walls, or keeps. For Slaanesh's domain is a temperate, beautiful landscape of art, colors, a warm, glowing sun, a babbling brook, and of course, the Dark Prince's circle beneath his ever-expanding pavilion that has been known as the Pleasure Palace. It is under this pavilion that every sin and act of excess is practiced to its fullest, with Slaanesh even hosting and judging these wild games of decadence. And from these events, the champions are chosen to bring their expertise back to the mortal realm and spread the Dark God's influence to more souls. To all that see, this place is at least on the surface a place of beauty. From the looks of this realm, you would think it easy for one of his fellow Dark Gods to invade and destroy. There are no walls or even a standing army outside of his demonettes, mostly too enthralled in whatever acts of lust they find themselves participating. And yet this is a realm that is not often ever attacked, despite him being the youngest and supposedly weakest of the Dark Gods. Why is this? The answer is far more simple. Fear. For no matter how many legions Khorne would spill into this realm, fanatic servants of Nurgle that would shamble about, or sorcerers of Tzeentch that invaded, their weakness is Slaanesh's defense. And this all comes down to the 6 circles of temptation that make up the realm of the serpent. The outermost ring is the circle of avidity, where intruders are tempted with treasures beyond measure, only to be turned to a golden statue should they take any. If they pass through successfully, they will pass into the second circle of gluttony, where any food or drink is offered in excess, but should they falter, they will consume until they literally explode under the strain of their sin. The next circle is that of carnality, where the demonettes dance and take the shape of whatever form the invader desires, be that man, woman, beast, perhaps something in between. If they're weak, they will succumb only to be ripped limb from limb by the servants of Slaanesh before their desires come to fruition. The next circle is that of paramountcy, where power is offered in many forms, be that command of armies, to gifts of sorcery and forbidden knowledge. But to take them will shatter the mind into a madness of paranoia and doubt. Should they succeed, the next circle is that of vainglory, where one sees their achievements met. But should they fold, their past deeds will mean nothing as they lose the will to move any further, becoming stagnant. The final circle, and possibly the most dangerous, is that of indolency, for it is the last that one must pass to enter into Slaanesh's pleasure palace, and it tempts with the promise of eternal rest. If somehow any intruder or pleasure seeker has made it to this circle and not yet enslaved to the Dark Prince, often this act of death will seem a sweet release to the damned. But should one falter, they will find nothing but an eternal oblivion beyond the reach of even death itself. However, should they pass this final circle, they will be rewarded, as they will be in the presence of Slaanesh. Unfortunately, there has yet to be any force that has made it to the inner sanctum intact, with most being reduced to a single warrior or champion, whom upon seeing the Dark Prince will fall to their knees and weep for his beauty. But this is not the only reason his brother gods fear him, for despite the all but unassailable nature of his realm, Slaanesh also has the one thing the other dark gods lack: a never-ending stream of souls with no end in sight. For should Khorne reign, there will come a time when there are no wars left to fight. Should Nurgle succeed, no life to plague. Should Tzeentch's schemes prevail, no order to oppose. But there will never be a conceivable time when mortals will not delight for dark pleasures and perform selfish acts of excess. It is a sustainable resource of souls, so much so that a time will come where they will spill over into his brother's realms, overtaking their paltry existence, and gather in a storm of unchecked energy that will sweep from the realms of chaos and into the mortal plane, spilling across all the lands and leaving its inhabitants in a tangled mess of writhing, forbidden pleasure. And he will drink in these sensations and know that it is good. It is fairly obvious why mortals would fall into the clutches of Slaanesh, for every mortal has a dark desire they oppress. But strangely enough, out of the four Chaos Gods, Slaanesh is the least worshipped by the tribes of the Wastes, with very few among their numbers calling upon his dark gifts as their patron god. Instead, the Prince of Pleasure is most revered within the lands of Order, the very people that are at war with the Dark Gods and all they stand for. Possibly the most at risk are in fact the nobility, the rulers of these lands, those that do not need to work hard to put food on the table, tend to have time for other dalliances and the means to pursue endeavors that most would never dream possible. And much like they say in our own world, idle hands are in fact the devil's playground. Likewise is true for the Dark Prince. There have been rumors that there are traditions in some of the wealthiest and oldest noble lines within the Empire that implicate them sending their sons and daughters to hunting lodges deep within the forest, where they dance and copulate with beastmen around roaring fires and engage in rituals they could not risk within the city of their births. Of course, these may in fact just be rumors, but there may be a hint of truth. But these are not the only ones at risk of falling into the lures of Slaanesh. I would not blame you for thinking that all warriors would be drawn to Khorne, a god of violence and murder, and for the most part, you would be correct. But you would be surprised to know that many, in fact, do fall into the hands of the serpent, as he strokes the need for perfection, and not just art or beauty, but also in the art of death. The warriors of Slaanesh delight in the fight, and where a warrior of Khorne is ruthless and efficient, one of Slaanesh is precise and flowing, almost like a dancer drifting from opponent to opponent, expertly turning aside blows and delivering killing strokes with ease and grace. These that excel and become Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh are bound in Chaos plate that is fused to the very flesh. However, unlike warriors from other gods, there are, gaps purposefully in this armor, tempting their enemies with the facade of weakness, of pale flesh. They are emblazoned with the symbol of Slaanesh and bathed in strange perfumes that befuddle the minds of their opponents. It is a common sight on the battlefield to see an enemy drop its weapon as the champion of Slaanesh closes the distance and savors a killing stroke. And yet, the nobility and warriors are not the only likely souls to pledge to the Dark Prince within these lands. Men in search of knowledge also fall into this treacherous trap, as the Dark Prince promises secrets lost to all. For these men, the pursuit of knowledge has become an obsession, one that they will willingly sacrifice anything to obtain. And slowly over time, they are stripped away, as the unspeakable truths and acts they are forced to participate in become too much for the mortal mind to handle, sending countless to the sanitarium in a gibbering mess. For this reason, even the clergy of the cult of Sigmar and the witch hunters themselves have to often search their own ranks for converts of the Dark Prince, as they are not immune to his influence. But those especially susceptible are the practitioners of magic, as Slaanesh's siren song will sing a lovely promise of power and forbidden knowledge, easily obtained for the price of a soul. And there are plenty more examples. Lesser nobles coveting the status of their betters, hunters seeking to kill bigger and more dangerous game, usually resulting in the hunting of men, or artists that wish to create something beyond themselves. To look upon it would cause the viewer to pluck their very eyes out, as nothing could ever be as perfect as it again. These are the mortal champions of Slaanesh, and he does grace his champions with heightened abilities. They are usually swift, beyond the ability of regular mortals, and graceful to boot, skilled to beyond the point of mastery in whatever they pursue, with his warriors having an aura of glory and splendor, capable of striking an opponent dumb, or even converting them to savage their once allies. His sorcerers are masters of domination and submission, able to scry forbidden truths and invoke dark rites of their patron. Speaking of mortal champions, Slaanesh, much like his siblings, gives out boons to his favored minions, which take many forms. However, while there are some physical changes inherent with his worship, the majority is to the mind and to the soul of the mortal in question, with them undergoing a psychological metamorphosis where their obsession is expanded upon and they feel the urge to attain more unique and extreme aspects of this vice until they master it. And this is where the Dark Prince's true nature shows itself, as he delights in the struggle of his followers as they strive further and further to greater heights, but he enjoys most when they attain what they seek and there is no further they can go, and they fall from a dizzying height. Their reality grows pale, lifeless, a shadow of what it was. This is the worst fate, and a fate of all of his followers, eventually, until their soul is collected and consumed by the serpent to strengthen his realm. For this reason, Slaanesh has some of the oldest and most established cults out of any of the Chaos Gods, with certain cults going back centuries within just the Empire, and even further within other parts of the world. In fact, the most infamous being the Cult of Pleasure, as Slaanesh is not just a god that focuses on men of the Warhammer world, but also the elves have a very special place within his kingdom, as they tend to experience emotions on a level that humans are just not capable. For this reason, their souls are the most coveted by the Dark Prince, and he has claimed every elf soul that he can. So much so that they have begun to collect and bind their dead into waystones so not to risk the likely chance they will end up in Slaanesh's gullet. Yet, this does not stop the elves from falling into his alluring grasp. Both dark, high, and even wood elves all fall into this sticky web, with, of course, the majority of them being stricken from the Dark Elf cloth. And while I continue to ramble on about the mortal followers of the Prince of Pleasure, he also has very powerful champions in the form of demons. While they are not as numerous as some of the vast armies of his brethren, they make up for it in passion, virility upon the battlefield. They are an embodiment of excess and pleasure, and a reflection of Slaanesh himself, quickly wading into battle and carving through flesh in a dance, splattering blood in patterns only a true artist could appreciate. And whom better to start with than the most numerous and iconic demons of Slaanesh, the Demonettes, also known as the Children of Slaanesh, the Debauched Ones, and the Decadent Seekers. These demons stand roughly as tall as a man, and are similar in appearance to a shapely woman. Only these women have a pinkish purple skin, black or emerald eyes without pupils, and elongated barbed tongues. Their lithe arms end in crab-like pincers, and their legs end in clawed talons like that of a bird. And instead of hair, they are adorned with horns. Demonettes wear almost nothing in the form of clothing or armor, usually having an exposed bosom and drawing attention to their swirling tattoo-like designs across their flesh. They exude a glamour of sorts that masks their repulsive appearance and captivates their enemies, luring them into a state of lustful embrace that allows them to rip into them easily as they laugh and revel in the pain they inflict. Now, as far as Total War is concerned, I see the Demonettes very simply similar in size and strength to what we already have in the Witch Elves. In fact, it would be a fairly straightforward conversion to just move them from the Witch Elf model to the Demonette model. And the only difference would be that I would give them a massive defensive debuff on their enemies, making them excellent at taking out lower tier infantry, and they should probably even get a bonus towards infantry, to say the least, since they are experts in killing men. But most of all, much like almost all of the units in this roster, they need to be fast, possibly the fastest infantry in the game, to give them a unique feel. A Slaanesh army should be lacking in the raw damage power of Khorne, the spellcasting of Nurgle, or the toughness of Nurgle and the spellcasting of Tzeentch, but they should excel in speed and martial prowess. Which brings us to the next demons to spill forth from the Pleasure Palace, the steeds of Slaanesh. These bipedal demons resemble an ostrich walking on two long feminine legs. However, they do not have the feathers, but have features like that of a horse, with a crest of long hair that starts at their neck and moves down their spine. It can be a multitude of colors, but it is typically a bright green, while their head, torso, and a tail is a deep lavender, and their underside a pastel yellow. Their flesh somewhat resembles that of a serpent, and occasionally they will have rows of breasts growing from their necks, obviously marking them as creatures of the Dark Prince. However, that isn't the strangest aspect about them, as their mouth is literally described as a sphincter-like hole with rows of pointed teeth and a single long, almost proboscis that extends from it with a barb on its tip. And much like all demons from this realm, they have an alluring quality that, despite their obvious wrongness, they have an air of beauty about them. Now, these steeds are in fact usually not seen without a demonette rider, but they can be quite lethal even on their own, and are fairly intelligent to boot. It's also said that these creatures can taste a soul on the wind of magic, making them almost like hunting dogs. Now in Total War, I say we get this as a pseudo-light cavalry unit, perhaps even similar to Warhounds, or possibly the Feral Cold ones. It's kind of a toss-up. With the exception that these would be much more light, much more built for speed than impact. They would be excellent for hitting artillery or skirmish units that couldn't get away fast enough, but would be pretty subpar against anything with some kind of armor, and more than likely they should have a very low leadership, low morale, since they do not have a rider guiding them, and they are described as beasts, though they are intelligent, but still a beast nonetheless. Since we are covering the steed, how about we get into some of the cavalries of Slaanesh before we move on to his next beast? And so the Seekers of Slaanesh seem appropriate. These are in fact the demonettes riding steeds of Slaanesh that we just spoke of. It is said that they are quick beyond comprehension, and countless rumors imply that they have somehow found a way to charm time itself, allowing them to travel between the seconds. Whatever the case, they are very fast, and true to their nature, cruel huntresses. The Seekers are more than capable of riding down their quarry, but often will allow them to escape, so they simply can do so again and again and again, utilizing the tracking nature of their steeds to keep their prey from ever truly escaping. They do this until the man breaks and willingly gives up to escape the torment. This is when they drag his soul to the Palace of Pleasure, to be tormented within its halls for all eternity. Now, in Total War, this would definitely be a no-brainer for implementation. I am seeing a light cavalry unit with crazy speed, easily the speed of perhaps even a flying unit. They have no armor to speak of, and they really are only good for hit-and-run tactics or taking out a vulnerable target, making them a very efficient light cavalry, but by no means an overpowered one. If for some reason they don't want to increase their speed too much, I instead will allow them to have some kind of aura that slows enemies down within a certain radius, similar to the Ice Wolves in the Norscan roster. But regardless, a very easy one, and one that I don't see not making it into this roster if we do in fact get a Slaaneshi army. The next cavalry unit within this demonic roster is that of the Seeker Chariots of Slaanesh. These are chariots pulled by steeds of Slaanesh and manned by demonettes and occasionally heralds of Slaanesh, which are essentially a more elite version of demonettes. However, the horrifying aspect of this chariot is not only its speed, being pulled by these quick demons, but the fact that the underside of the chariot resembles a swirling mass of blades, not unlike a blender. When this chariot hits a unit, it not only hits with force, but any that do not throw themselves aside are swept up in the mass of blades and shredded into trunks of meat. All the while, the demonettes laugh and writhe as they lash out at their enemies, reveling in the destruction they sow. Now, as far as Total War is concerned, I don't see any reason why this unit would be left out, as chariots are a regular part of pretty much most of the army rosters, and this one is very much iconic. However, this chariot in particular should not only be fast, but should have some kind of leadership debuff attached to it as the blades sweep through the ranks, causing a minimum of a fear, or if not a terror effect, as the enemy is shredded to giblets as it passes through. Of course, much like any other chariot, it should not fare well within melee combat, more of a hit-and-run unit. But regardless, very, very iconic. The last cavalry unit within this roster is that of the Hellflayers of Slaanesh, which act as more of a demon engine pulled by steeds of Slaanesh. Similar in concept as the Secret Chariots, these demon engines were originally used as a means of grinding up the corpses of the dead after a battle, so that the unnatural fauna of the Dark Prince's realm could easily dispose of it. However, it was discovered that these could also be used upon the living to a great degree of success, as these engines are built with metal that not only cleaves through flesh and bone and steel, but is capable of transmuting the emotions and, more importantly, the terror of its victims into the demonettes that are manning it. This puts them into a frenzied state as they gorge themselves on raw emotions of pain and death, as the hot, sticky viscera of their enemies showers about them, being pulled in by rows of sweeping blades. These beings are much heavier, these engines, than a normal chariot, and often in the vanguard of Slaaneshi armies, with champions and honored demonettes zealously charging into battle. Now, in Total War, I see this unit as being a very heavy chariot. Think either a single model or a 3-model chariot, with similar stats to that of a Secret Chariot, although obviously just bigger, more charge bonus. With the exception that it should get a bonus for staying in melee, and definitely it should have the Frenzy ability as it just chews through individuals, making this one of the only heavy units in the entire Slaaneshi demon army, and of course would still be fast even for something so big. Which brings us out of the cavalry and back into the war beasts of the serpent with the fiends of Slaanesh. These act as a hunting beast for Slaanesh, and are large quadrupedal creatures that combine features of humans, scorpions, and reptiles. They have the head of some kind of lizard with emerald eyes sitting on the sides of their skull, lolling about as their long, prehensile tongues search for prey. The main body is white, or some kind of pastel hue, with the long scorpion tail segment ending in a stinger that drips with venom. There are rows of breasts along its torso, which sits up straight like that of a man, with the hindquarters of a horse. 2 large pincer-like arms extend from what would be its shoulders, and its 4 legs are humanoid in shape, but scaled and clawed like that of a lizard. It can have a mane of hair with other tufts around its ankles, or have nothing of the sort, being a true creature of chaos. Now, as far as Total War is concerned, these creatures would make excellent, monstrous cavalry, or maybe even infantry, maybe a hybrid of some kind. Something that is quick but has mass. It should have some poison-like abilities and definitely armor-piercing with those massive claws. A good heavy addition to the roster of the Dark Prince. I would suspect that since these are very much base beasts, they would have a very low morale, a very low leadership score. But I'm just spitballing here. It doesn't mention anything about any kind of frenzy-like ability about them, so, just the simple kind of Slaaneshi aura stuff. And finally, the last demons in the Slaaneshi roster, the Keeper of Secrets. It is said that no 2 of these greater demons are alike, but in general, they are massive, towering figures, the size of giants. They can have either bovine or androgynous humanoid features. It has 4 arms, 2 of which typically end in a pincer or blade of some kind. They have large emerald eyes amongst a bramble of curling horns and pallid flesh of its head. Their mouth is full of razor-like teeth, and a long barbed tongue stretches around these razors to dig deep into flesh. They are capable of tasting the emotions of the creatures they kill, and they languish in it. They stand on 2 humanoid legs, either ending in clawed feet or hooves. Its skin is oily, and yet it appears soft and succulent, a lavender or pinkish color, and exudes a musk that is capable of driving those around it mad with lust or any number of vice. It does appear to be scantily clad, and usually has rows of exposed breasts upon its chest. It wears an assortment of armor and many-colored silks and jewels, only lending further to the seductive nature it possesses. These are the most graceful of demons within the Warhammer world. Nothing else compares, and to witness them flaying their enemies as they stand slack-jawed, or stripping themselves down in carnal desires enough to drive a man mad. Each slice of their blades and claws painting the ground with gore in maddening patterns. Above all, they relish in the dark desires that dwell in any mortal. But much like their paramour, they have a taste for elves, making the homes of the elves the chief targets of these demons, should they ever get the chance to grace the mortal plane. The most famous of these creatures being Nakari, the ancient demon that was slain by Anarion the Defender, and whom has claimed the souls of all of his spawn, systematically collecting them over the centuries since his defeat, until only 3 have been left. Malekith, the Witch King, Tyrion, and Teclis. I would highly recommend reading the Tyrion and Teclis trilogy, if that does in fact spike your interest like it did to my own. No pun intended. But as far as Total War is concerned, these creatures are most certainly either your generals or a single monster unit. I'm conflicted. Much like we have discussed with the other Dark Gods. You could have a Keeper of Secrets, almost like a giant, and perhaps an Exalted Keeper of Secrets as your general. Or just have it as a single unit. Regardless, they should have a massive combat aura that invigorates their allies, but debuffs the enemy, and maybe even reduces their speed as they are half-heartedly retreating from this thing that they would honestly wish to turn around and give them oblivion. In addition, much like all the units in this roster, they should be fast, like freakishly fast. These are definitely monsters on their roster, and much like all the other greater demons, we couldn't have a Slaaneshi army without a Keeper of Secrets of some kind. And by now, you can probably tell that I may or may not favor the Dark Prince over the other gods, but who knows? Unfortunately, that is going to be it for the roster of Slaanesh that I have a decent knowledge of. This is by no means the full extent of the demons spawned from the Pleasure Palace, but they are the ones most likely to make it into the initial inclusion of a Slaaneshi roster for Total War Warhammer 3. Much like Tzeentch, there are going to be quite a few hurdles with a Slaaneshi army in Total War, one being the fact that this army is completely built around speed. They have almost no heavy units and have no skirmish units. This could be fixed with giving some of the Seekers perhaps like a javelin attack, limited range capabilities, but they're definitely no artillery or even strong holding units to boot, which means that to make this effective as an army in Total War, CA will need to either tweak some of these demons or add in elements from the Chaos Warriors roster, which honestly, I do see them doing, as these problems could easily be solved by allowing the recruitment of Marauders and Chaos Warriors, just altered to meet a more Slaaneshi-themed standard. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think of this army, what it could be like, and definitely just your thoughts in general on Chaos and its possible inclusion in Warhammer 3. So, leave me a comment down in the comment section below with your interest, and I would love to hear from you guys. And of course, if I've missed something you think is important, make sure to leave it down below. and I will do my best to include it in some future video in some distant time. I would like to take this time now to say thank you to everybody within the Cult of Thick, especially out there, for sticking by me for so long. And it really means a lot to me to see your guys' support in the comment section and, of course, in messages and everything else that has been sent. So I very much appreciate it. Speaking of which, do make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep everything going. Oh, and if you have not checked out the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay I have on the channel, go ahead and give it a spin. If you like chaos, you'll like it, as it is now finished and ready for binging. And if you like that, while it may not be Warhammer themed, do check out my new D&D campaign, Emberfell Whispers from the Stars. It does have a lot of similar themes as Warhammer, as I am a child of my proclivities. As usual, guys, I have been Jumbo Thick. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. Have a good day.